Well, welcome back to another Stand on Guard. You're watching the Krayden'S Right channel here on YouTube. Thanks for joining us today. In a few minutes, I'll be back, and I'm going to tell you why Justin Trudeau has got to resign. So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Welcome back to Stand on Guard with David Krayden. I'm your host. And if you've been watching the news at all in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you'll notice that Justin Trudeau is not just an embarrassment. He's embarrassing the whole country. And that's really what my latest article on Substack, www.substack.com/David Krayden is all about. It's about why Justin Trudeau needs to resign. And I provided a number of reasons for this. But I think we've got number one right there in front of you. Only Justin Trudeau would have a former Waffen-SS Nazi soldier invited to the House of Commons while there's a speech going on from a foreign leader. Have that former Nazi member recognized by the speaker, who gives him praise as a Canadian hero, asks him to wave to the crowd and stand up, and he gets a standing ovation from everybody there. All MPs rose. Now, Justin Trudeau immediately reacted to this by saying, "Not my fault. It's all the speaker's fault." Not only that, watch out for that Russian propaganda, that Russian misinformation. That's who's to blame for all of this. So did it work? No, of course it didn't work. You know what we know, though? Here, I want you to see this. This is a Facebook post from the daughter-in-law of Yaroslav Hunka, the former Waffen-SS veteran in question, where she says her father-in-law is waiting in the wings to meet Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine. So they both knew he was there, according to Hunka's daughter-in-law, Teresa Hunka. They both knew he was there. And do you think for a minute they didn't know who he was and what his history was? Now, the speaker was stupid enough not to seem to know that anybody who was fighting the Russians in the Second World War was with the Germans and not with the Allied powers, because Canada, United States, Britain, other Commonwealth countries were fighting with Russia, called the Soviet Union at the time, but we were fighting with the Russians against the Germans. Former speaker, he resigned over this, Anthony Rota, did not seem to know that. And yet somehow that man became Speaker of the House. Yeah, I blame the speaker, but I also blame Justin Trudeau because he knew what he was doing. He hoped nobody would notice. And the mainstream media did not notice. The mainstream media was too stupid to see a problem with this guy being feted as a former fighter against the Russians. No problem with that. They cannot put their history together in any semblance of sanity or normalcy. So Trudeau thought they would not notice, and they didn't. Thank God independent media did and said, this is ridiculous. This is outrageous. And Trudeau is trying to escape this. But you know what was really bad about that? As bad as inviting a Nazi was, you know what the Liberals wanted to do? They wanted to excise the whole event from the official record, just like in 1984 by George Orwell, where his main character, Winston Smith, is an official censor for the government that goes back and changes history in order for it to sync with the policy of the present government, to ensure consistent orthodoxy over the years. That's what this liberal government wanted to do. And here is, yes, there she is, House Leader, Government House Leader, Liberal House Leader Karina Gould. There she is with the great Canadian hero, Mr. Hunka. And there's the speaker here. Yes, the speaker here was smiling, grinning broadly about this happy event. And it was Karina Gould's bright suggestion that we excise the whole thing from the official record, like it never happened. And she wanted all party support for this motion. Thank God the Conservatives said, no, that just smacks of Soviet-style management. Forget it. It's Orwellian. Yes, it couldn't be more Orwellian. It's literally Orwellian. So this has been perhaps the nadir of Justin Trudeau's horrible time as Prime Minister. But I'm going to fill in a few more details before I end here. But this cannot stand. He will not get away with this. And Zelenskyy doesn't warrant an apology. Zelenskyy hobnobs, deals with Nazis all the time. Nazism, neo-Nazism is a strong political dynamic in Ukraine, certainly because of the Azov regiment traces its roots back to the Waffen-SS. It has Nazi symbolism, Nazi flag, Nazi colors, and it is proud of these things. I have seen pictures of these people parading around in Waffen-SS uniforms with SS helmets, swastika flags, And what makes you mad, though, is that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was more concerned about apologizing to Zelenskyy, who needs no apology, than he was to Canadians and Canadian veterans. That's outrageous. And I always tell you here and stand on guard, I'm in no politician's pocket. I might be a small C conservative, but I am not going to carry water for the Conservative Party when they do stupid things like that. Then that was a complete inept and botched attempt to manage this crisis and to turn it around for something that was positive. And Poilievre did not do very well. Talking about how insulted Zelenskyy was. Nonsense, rubbish. He wasn't insulted. He was in on this too. So let's not pretend. Let's not pretend. So this is a horrible day, and the suggestion that we just excise it from history is just so liberal. So everything about this is tragic. So why else did Justin Trudeau resign? If this isn't enough, there he is, suggesting India is going around Canada killing people based on supposedly evidence he got from the Five Eyes. But you wonder if he wants to get kicked out of the Five Eyes because he wants to cut $1 billion from national defense, which is going to make us even more disreputable on the world stage. But he's presented no evidence of this. And his last trip to India was another disaster, another diplomatic disaster, where he missed meeting after meeting. He deliberately alienated the Indian Prime Minister. And his train gets stuck on the runway for 2 days, supposedly for mechanical problems. But a former Indian diplomat says it's because Trudeau's plane was loaded with cocaine. And the Trudeau at times was under the massive influence of cocaine use. Now, we have got to follow up in this story because we've got a prime minister who's a coke addict. We've got another problem. And believe me, there are times when Trudeau, when he's going on about defending Ukraine to the last man, for as long as it takes, he sounds like somebody strung out on drugs. And of course, that's all this trip by Zelenskyy was about, to distract from the catastrophic domestic policy that he's introduced. His trip to India in September was perhaps worse than his 2018 trip to India, where he spent most of his time preening in traditional Indian clothing for camera ops. And most good woke politicians would recognize and call that sort of activity cultural appropriation. but not when Justin Trudeau does it. Not when Justin Trudeau does it. It's okay. It's okay when he does it. It's always justified, and it's always okay. He can do whatever he wants. He can parade around in blackface and blame it all on the racism of the Montreal he grew up in. He can ridicule and he can throw female cabinet ministers under the bus and lecture female MPs, and he can call everybody else misogynistic. He's the blackface guy who calls everybody else racist. He is a first-rate, third-rate man who is a complete hypocrite, completely narcissistic character who cannot take responsibility or accountability. Now, what else has he done? He has shown absolutely no enthusiasm to investigate China's interference in Canadian politics. Absolutely none. And he's not interested, clearly not interested in this. And he's not interested because he knows the Chinese influence benefited the Liberal Party and probably got him his last minority government. And so on, and so on, and so on. Trudeau should have resigned over the SNC-Lavalin scandal, where the Attorney General at the time, Jody Wilson-Raybould, revealed that she was highly concerned that the government was showing favoritism towards a Quebec contractor, so it did not have any legal entanglements because that contractor was important for votes in Quebec. Trudeau neatly sidestepped this, threw Jody Wilson-Raybould under the bus, back threw his own chief of staff under the bus over this, and walked on. But this is only the tip of the catastrophe that Trudeau has created. And I could mention more things. How about the medically assistance in dying, MAID, which is euthanasia by any other name? And that will soon be applied to people with mental health. Yeah, they're really in a good position to assess whether or not they want to commit suicide, aren't they? But this government doesn't care. It's going to be people who are depressed. Next, it's going to be people who are unemployed. Next, it's going to be people who are suffering from financial adjustments. People in poverty. They'll be next. Just let them die so we don't have to worry about the problems. We already have a country where we have unrestricted abortion on demand, where it's basically infanticide. We already have a country that is more authoritarian every day. Now, I could mention what is coming up, and I have said this repeatedly. Are you aware that in Great Britain, a journalist was arrested for something called malinformation? And under the new UK Online Safety Act, if information is judged to be unpleasant by fact checkers, a journalist can be arrested. And a journalist was arrested. Yeah, he was released because there really wasn't much to hold him on. But it's a good sign of what's coming, because guess what? Justin Trudeau has his own version of the Online Safety Act coming in Canada. It has been worked on now for the last year and a half. It's part of his internet censorship trilogy. I expect this legislation to be introduced in the fall, and it's called the Online Safety Bill, and it will penalize and outlaw disinformation. And the bill will not define disinformation, because that will make it more difficult to enforce the bill and eventually the act when it becomes law. Now that is outrageous. So disinformation will mean whatever Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government says it means. Now this bill is coming. It's dangerous, and it cannot stand, because this is another nail in the coffin of Canada's freedom. I don't think Trudeau ever had a more ignominious moment than when the Freedom Convoy came to Ottawa. He refused to meet with anybody. He called them all fringe, misogynistic, racist. And he and a bunch of other moronic liberal MPs suggested they were all a bunch of Nazis. And even suggested there was some guy in the midst of them marching around with a Nazi flag. Every time Trudeau described this, he suggested the Freedom Convoy was something like the Nuremberg Rally with acres of Nazi flags flying everywhere. He was so incredibly out of sync with reality. But that was one of the most perfidious moments in the Justin Trudeau regime. One of the worst moments in Justin Trudeau's legacy. And that's another reason he should resign. Because he fled the city when this happened, and he refused to deal with the reality in front of him, and he just smeared his political opponents. And this is the same guy who apparently couldn't recognize a real Nazi when he came into the House of Commons, but he can find all kinds of faux Nazis outside, people he just doesn't like, political opponents. So, is it time for Justin Trudeau to go? Trudeau must go as a hashtag on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. You'll see it all the time. But it's not just a hashtag. It's a clear and present necessity. Trudeau must go. He is a clown. He is embarrassing the country. He's not just an embarrassment himself anymore, though he remains that. He's embarrassing the whole country every time he opens his mouth, every time he leaves the country, or every time he addresses an issue in Canada. Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, because of your idiocy of allowing a Nazi into the House of Commons. Give me a break. The country's had enough of you. And we had a 1 million person march in Canada, the 1 million March for Children on September 20th, to say enough of gender ideology in the schools. Because Trudeau has been supporting this agenda tooth and nail. He's the one who said parents should not have a right to know if their children want to change their gender or their pronouns, and should certainly not be able to give their permission to do that. He thinks the state should be raising your children. And if you don't agree with him, you're on the far right. Actually, you're just normal. Trudeau is not normal. He is so extreme, so woke, he cannot communicate with ordinary Canadians anymore, if he ever could. He's completely out of sync with the national character, with the Canadian community. He's out of sync with average Canadians, and he has been for a long time. And it's time for him to go. Before we get more authoritarian measures, before we have to go and endure more censorship, before he embarrasses this country even more. It's time for Trudeau to go. And before I go, thank you for your financial support. Continue to do that. Ring the bell so we can beat Trudeau's censorship, and you'll get notifications the next time the show is coming on. Subscribe and share it to your friends. Share it to anybody you think might want to hear this broadcast. Thank you. For the numbers are rising every day, every week for this broadcast, and I thank you for that. I'm going to continue to be on here as much as possible, and I'm going to cover question period too, because I can see there's a demand for that, for some real analysis of what's happening and what is otherwise a complete waste of time in the nation's business. But thank you for watching today. God bless you. Let's fight for Canada. Let's resolve to resist, and let's take back this country from the woke extremists